report. So as I said, the index score is between 0 and 10. And first thing is to say it's important not to really look at this as a league table. There isn't really bad or good scores. The score is there just to give us an idea of a country's labour market. So, for example, just to give you a feel for what this means, a score of 5 would suggest quite a balanced picture for the labour market, whereas scores closer to 0 would indicate that there's less intense competition to find candidates for key vacancies. Maybe there's so little competition, there's too many candidates. And a score closer to 10 would indicate that there's severe difficulty in finding the right skills to fill key vacancies and that labour markets are experiencing more pressure. So the report, anyway, was created using 7 different indicators, each of which contribute to the final score. Each indicator focuses on a different aspect of how easy or difficult it is to recruit skilled labour. And again, each one of those gets a score from 0 to 10. And then the overall score is obviously an average of the 7 indicator scores, if that all makes sense. So I'm just going to fly through each one of them one by one here, and hopefully it makes sense. So the first indicator is education flexibility. That measures whether the educational system is able to provide the workers for the future, especially in areas like science, technology, literacy, and math. That indicator gives us a really good idea of the current state of education. Improving educational standards is obviously crucial to bridging the skills gap in the long term. So on this category, a low score, or the lower the score, it means the more chance that the education system is flexible enough to meet the needs of the labour market. A higher score means less likely that the education system is equipped to build a solid pipeline for the future. Next indicator is labour market participation, and that means basically how much of a country's population is actually in the workforce. So bringing more people into the workforce is a really powerful way to improve a company's economic and labour market performance. So countries that can bring more employees into the workforce can gain an edge over countries with less ability to do so. So on this one, the lower the score, the larger the pool of workers basically. The higher the score, the lower number of workers there are out there available to either join or already be in the workforce. Next one is labour market flexibility. That basically looks at how easy or difficult it is for businesses to acquire the talent that they need. So governments play a really important part in determining how well labour markets function. Key example of this would be, say, for example, skilled immigration. For instance, governments can cut red tape, they can adapt policies that welcome talented people from abroad. So the lower the score here, the better aligned governmental policies are to the needs of the labour market. A high score means that there's more barriers restricting the labour market. Next one, talent mismatch. That looks at the skills that we have and the skills that we need. So for example, if you had 100 engineers and you had 250 bankers, but in fact we actually need 250 engineers and only 100 bankers, then we obviously have a mismatch. So a higher score here indicates that businesses are facing a serious problem in matching unemployed candidates with available jobs. A low score would suggest employers are having an easier time finding workers with the skills that they actually need. Next one is overall wage pressure, and that tells us whether wages are keeping pace with inflation or the overall cost of living. So here, a high score would tell us that there's an overall wage pressure that is higher than the historic norm. A low score would tell us that wages are not rising quickly and those pressures are not present. Wage pressure in high-skilled industries, that's the rate at which wages in a high-skilled industry are outpacing those in low-skilled industries. So some industries such as engineering or technology require higher skilled staff than others. So high score here shows the wages in the high skilled industry are growing faster than in low skilled industries. A lower score would tell us the wages for those in high skilled industries are rising more slowly or they're in line with low skilled industries. And then finally, we've got wage pressure in high skilled occupations. So similar in a way to the previous indicator, but this specifically tells us how wages in high-skill occupations are rising compared to wages in low-skill occupations. So, for example, you could have a high-skill occupation and a low-skill occupation in an industry that might be deemed higher low-skilled, if that makes sense. The type of role included in high-skill occupations would be, for example, like a management role that would require a higher level of training and experience. So the higher the score here, the more skill shortages there are affecting that level of high-skill occupation. Lower score tells us wages for those high-skill occupations are rising more slowly or in line with low-skill occupations. So that's that over with. Hopefully it makes sense. Okay, so we'll just look at the key findings to start with, and I'm literally just going to read this out because they're pretty clear. So as the global recovery, and this is from a global point of view, I should say. So as the global recovery continues and more skilled jobs are being created, the talent crisis continues to worsen. Secondly, companies are struggling to find employees with the necessary skills, particularly in high-skill occupations such as IT and engineering. In 2014, so bear in mind this survey was done in 2014, and we're releasing it now. Wage pressure is evident in a number of labour markets around the world. Talent mismatch levels and labour market participation have also worsened. And finally, tightness in the labour market is now leading to wage inflation in certain countries and industries as businesses are struggling to attract and retain employees with the skills they need. So this is a list of all of the countries, and you can see the various scores that they've got. The graph is taken directly from the report. It shows all the countries, how they compare, and as I mentioned there, this isn't a league table, it's a reference point where we're able to view the overall scores of all of the countries as well as see the movement year on year. You could almost look at this as like a pressure gauge. So the higher up the table, the more pressure the market is under, but equally you don't want to be at the bottom of this table either. So the dark blue line, or the dark blue bar, I suppose, signifies this year's score. The light blue bar shows us last year's score. So you can see here there's been some dramatic shifts between 2013 and 14, like New Zealand and Japan would be good examples. New Zealand can be attributed to just improved economic performance as the country returns to kind of a more normal labour market. That's starting to cause some pressure. And Japan's index score, on the other hand, is actually a result of a slowdown in their rate of economic growth, meaning the labour markets have begun to ease from last year. We can see Canada there is pretty much in the upper half of the table with a score this year of 5.6, which we're going to look at that in a moment and explain it. Canada's index shows that our job market is not really under as much pressure in general as some of the other countries, as you can see there. And it's actually seen a reduction in pressure since last year. It was 5.9 last year. And then even compare that to the US, for example, that's far higher up with a score of 6.3, and we will look at the US in more detail too. So looking at Canada just on its own, we've got a score of 5.6, as I said. So despite the fact that there's steady growth in the economy, which is debatable today now, is it going to continue being steady growth? We will see. Canada actually experienced a decline in the overall score down from 5.9, i.e. there is slightly less pressure in the market. So why would that be? Much of the easing is really attributable to declines in the unemployment rate at the end of 2014, which was below long-term averages. As I mentioned earlier, this means there's an increase in labour market participation, and that's a good thing. More people in the workforce, it improves the economy, but also increases the pool of active and potentially available workers. The flip side of this, of course, is that if that trend was to continue each year, you would eventually get to a point where finding people for any job would start to become difficult. So we'll just have a look at the breakdown of the different indicator scores for Canada. So as I said there, despite the improvement to the overall economy, including declining unemployment, there's really little evidence that Canada is experiencing much overall wage pressure. Having said that, the wage pressure seen in high-skill industries and occupations could be attributed to the high level of talent mismatch, and we'll look at that later on. Canada's labour market, I think, generally speaking, benefits or continues to benefit from significant inward migration. The lowest score on there for Canada is the labour market flexibility. And remember that a low score here probably means good things. So the lower the score, the better aligned governmental policies are to the needs of the labour market. So high score would mean there's restrictions getting in the way. So depending on your point of view, you may agree with this or you may not agree with it. Some people feel that there's too many people entering the market from overseas. We've also got plenty of clients who will say that it needs to be easier to bring in foreign talent. I think really the point here is that regardless of your viewpoint, it's probably better aligned with business needs, i.e. the bringing in of overseas talent in Canada than you would have in a lot of other countries. So it's probably a good thing. Canada also has quite a low score in education flexibility, and again, to explain that, a low score means the education system is actually flexible enough to meet the changing needs of the labour market. The higher the score, the less likely the education system would be equipped to build a pipeline for the future, so that's good news. The highest score is wage pressure in high-skilled occupations, which actually makes sense, and we can see that happening daily. And in our own salary guide that we released a couple of months ago, we see wage pressure specifically in construction, in technology, in mid to senior level management, most engineering positions, particularly wherever there's a skill shortage that is quite extreme. So in summary here, we've got downward pressure from overall wage pressure, from net in-migration and structural unemployment, and then you've got upward pressure from wage pressure in high-skilled occupations, the talent mismatch, and labour market participation. Okay, now if we contrast that with our closest neighbour, what do we see? So number one, you kind of realise how lucky we are here, because the US actually has an overall score of 6.3, which shows that they've got a really elevated level of stress in the job market there. And then secondly, a couple of individual scores for the US that I would draw your attention to is in the talent mismatch and wage pressure in high-skilled industries, which are both at a very high level, just below 10 really, almost at the maximum for both, meaning that the US has got a major problem with talent mismatch, people without jobs not being suitable for the actual available jobs, employers really struggling to find suitable candidates in areas like technology and engineering. That's causing major wage pressure in high-skilled industries as a result. But what does all of that mean for Canada? Well, with higher wage pressure comes higher wages, which means that people in industries here will be more attracted to leave the Canadian market and move south. So that will in turn put more pressure on the Canadian job market here. So we will see what happens. And then on that topic, actually, one question that we have asked recently to our clients, we asked Canadian employers, where's the most competition coming from when you recruit? And you've got 4.5% citing the US as a problem. So for now, it's not a major issue, but it is something to bear in mind, especially for the really rare skill set, and if there's a gap between how well the US economy is doing compared to the Canadian economy. All right, so just looking at the talent mismatch in a little bit more detail. So the information on these slides is specifically based on Canadian employers. So there's been a lot of talk in the media over the last few years about the skill shortage. First of all, there was agreement that there was a skill shortage. Then somebody said that there wasn't. And it seems like recently this belief is there again that there actually is, and that seems to be gathering pace. So it's quite confusing. Our view is that there's a clear shortage of highly skilled people in very specific areas. And if you're an employer, say in the construction industry in Canada, try telling that person that there isn't a shortage of estimators with 5 years experience. But at the same time, there's clearly a challenge to find work if you are unskilled or at an entry level, and both of those things are true, and both are very different situations. So in any event, we asked whether Canada suffers from a skill shortage. 57% of people in Canada, or employers in Canada, believe that to be true. And then we asked whether your own industry is affected by a skill shortage. 90% believe that to be the case. On the topic of the effect that it has, we all know that when recruitment is difficult, it revolves around simply just a lack of good candidates and rising salaries. We wanted to see what else employers are becoming concerned about. We asked this question last year so we can compare the results with this year. And after the usual issues of skill shortage and salary levels, you've got around 55% of people starting to think about their own company reputation, and 50% thinking about their own company profile in the market. And I don't think the issue there is anything negative about a company's reputation, but it's more so to do with whether the candidate pool is even aware of what that reputation actually is. And I think a challenge for lots of employers today, just getting your voice heard, because of so much noise out there, not just recruitment noise, it's competing with all of the noise online every day. Like, how do you get your message out? Final point on this slide, right at the bottom, the amount of time it takes to fill a role is a good indicator of the pressure the job market is, so we've started to track this here in Canada. You can see the majority of employers saying it's taking about 2 to 6 months to fill a role where there is a candidate shortage. The most difficult level of role to fill would be senior management roles. That can have a knock-on effect, of course, in terms of cost and productivity. You have to bring in contractors when they're trying to fill the job, etc. So more evidence of there being a skill shortage in certain areas. In the survey last year, we asked what was causing the skills shortage. Sorry, when I say last year, it was actually that we launched this year. It was in January. But anyway, one of the questions we asked at the time was, what's actually causing the skill shortage in your own industry? And the clear answer was a lack of people entering in the industry. There was also a lack of training and development, which I'm going to come back to in a couple of slides. But we wanted to dig a little bit deeper, so we asked this question, which is basically why, or what's the main reason for too few people entering your industry? And there's lots of reasons, but really they boil down to awareness. You can group three of those under the same category almost. So you've got lack of awareness of opportunities at school, lack of awareness of opportunities in university or college, and then perception and stereotyping. So almost a lack of awareness or lack of education as to what the opportunities are, or what they would be like, or what a career would be like within a particular industry. And you've got, that comes to 53% saying that that's really the problem. Another really interesting insight is that employers actually believe that resolving the skill shortage is in their own hands. So 35% saying that the responsibility is actually theirs. And I was personally really surprised about that. I would have thought that most employers would have said it's the responsibility of probably an industry association or schools or colleges or probably the government. But we've got a majority here saying that it's up to themselves, which is interesting, and it's quite encouraging actually in a way. I was actually talking to somebody about this last week, gave a fantastic example. This guy was from the Ontario Manufacturers Association. I may not have the exact name right there, but they've come together to attract, recruit and train a number of entry-level people to directly respond to the skill shortage in their own area. And not only is it bearing fruit, but it's also directly alleviating the mismatch, because who knows what those individuals would be doing now had they not been picked up in that way and had been left on the shelf. So that's brilliant stuff to hear, and we should see more of that. The lack of skilled candidates has an effect on organisations. That definitely happens. If there's a lack and you can't get the right people, it has an effect. So we wanted to find out a bit more about this, find out specifically the effects it was having. So 1/3 of employers said that the skill shortage was affecting their own business activity levels or holding them back. We asked, how exactly is it affecting business activity? And you've got 45% saying it has affected productivity directly. And that's interesting because on the one hand, you've actually got employers trying to improve productivity by not adding permanent headcount, and at the same time saying the productivity is being negatively affected by not being able to find the right people. What effect is the skill shortage having within companies and on the existing staff? Well, you've got over 30% saying it's causing increased stress leaves, 35% saying they're seeing reduced levels of office morale, and then a dominant proportion, 55%, is just saying it's just causing general inefficiencies in their own organisation. I think the point here is that companies are trying to do more with the same number of people, and that can be attractive at times, but you can only push that so far, and you might wear out the people that you actually already do have. So what are companies actually doing to respond to this? So we've a couple of quick points to make here. So a quick, highly effective fix is obviously using contract staff, and that's what 35% of companies are doing. However, if you're going to have a sustainable business, it really does require development and promotion of staff over a period of time, and that means effective succession planning. But it turns out that only just over, well, almost 34% of employers say that they actually have a succession plan in place. Another really interesting insight is that employers actually believe that resolving the issue is their own issue, as I said on the previous slide, and that is encouraging. So if they could do a better job at attracting candidates or investing in entry-level candidates and developing them through the system, it would take the pressure off eventually. But it's easy to take a long-term view when you've got short-term pressures to deal with. What effect is this having then on wage pressures? So we just look at this in a little bit more detail. So this slide actually shows the number of countries with increasing pressures on the 7 different categories versus the number of countries experiencing decreasing pressures, if that makes sense. We've got in 20 of the countries in the index, if you just look at the overall wage pressure one right there, 20 of the countries suggesting that there's an increase in labour market pressures because the overall wage pressure indicator rose. Countries experiencing the sharpest rise in overall wages were Ireland, Luxembourg and India, and you've got 9 countries seeing a wage pressure decline. Countries with the biggest declines were actually Japan, Singapore and Canada. This is just Canada information, what we have on this slide. So outside of specific skill sets driving salary growth, how about level of seniority? So we asked respondents to answer where they were feeling wage pressure. Here is that there's obviously the most wage pressure here we can see is at mid-level to senior level, or senior management level, with about 60% or over 60% saying that they're actually seeing that. And then at the junior end, not so much, around 30%. But 30% of employers are using performance-related bonuses to respond to salary increases instead of increasing salaries, which is quite a clever thing to do. And almost 50% feeling that their company doesn't offer competitive salaries or at the market rate. So while Canada as a whole is not really experiencing wage pressure, we can see there that there's instances and situations where people or organisations are feeling it. And this goes on to explain that in a little bit more detail. So this is actually looking at how different industries or functional areas are feeling wage pressures. Again, this is just Canada. And you can see here, if you focus on oil and gas, feeling a lot of wage pressure there. But having said that, that was from a survey done in January of this year, and we know that things have changed a lot in that market since then. So maybe that would be different if we surveyed it today. And perhaps there's a positive way of looking at the changes in the marketplace there if you are in oil and gas. Other ones that may be interesting, HR seems to be feeling quite a bit of pressure on wages, as is the construction industry for obvious reasons. But anyway, so the message here is that there are different levels of pressure on different sectors or areas across Canada, as opposed to just making a generalization and saying that there is or there isn't. Okay, how about we look forward and say, where will the future talent actually come from, or how should you be thinking about this? So I'll just start with something that's probably a little bit obvious, but it's very, very relevant. So the ageing workforce is a key element of the pressure that Canada is going to face in future years, and it's an absolute fact. And this quote from the Globe and Mail, I think, says it better than I probably could, so I'll just read it out. Statistics Canada shows that if current trends continue, within 10 years, 1/4 of the country's workers will be over the age of 55. That's fair enough, but the second one is even worse. Furthermore, by 2031, there's likely to be less than one worker for every retiree. 30 years ago, in 1981, there were 6 workers for each retiree in Canada. So that means that we would actually, at that point, have more retired people than we would have working people, which would be quite scary and strange sounding. So it is definitely an issue. So I think this is a really good slide. It's a great example of how the ageing workforce could affect a particular industry, or indeed you could do something similar for your own organisation. This is from our global oil and gas annual survey. So Canada's oil and gas industry would appear to be very different from some other countries, or most other countries. So we have a concentration of the workforce here aged over 50, you can see on the right, compared to other countries where in fact it is the opposite, where they've got a real concentration of people aged 35 and younger. If I would ask that question, say, what does the distribution curve look like in your own organisation? And that would certainly be a worthwhile exercise to do, and you could get a view on what you need to do over the next few years. On that same topic, or a connected topic, is the idea of hiring entry-level or young people. That's got to be part of the long-term solution. But are people actually doing that? So 68% of companies said that graduates made up less than 10% of their total hiring last year. Then you've got the remaining around 30% probably taking a longer term view and hiring anywhere from 10% to 50% of their total hires were entry level. Still, you've got the vast majority, the 70%, potentially not feeding the future pipeline enough. But saying hire more entry-level people is great, but doing it isn't easy, and you can see that from these couple of statistics. So 45% said that new graduates only just met or didn't really meet their expectations, and 60% are concerned with the level of knowledge that new graduates come with, and that's not surprising, but it does maybe point towards more improvement required for businesses and education to work more closely together and to cooperate. Also, and interestingly, the same proportion, so 60%, said that they were concerned with the soft skills of new graduates. So I don't really know what we can do about figuring that one out. But if I did know, I could make a lot of money from parents. Okay, we asked what you think are the main reasons contributing to the skill shortage in your industry. I mentioned this kind of briefly earlier. So the biggest reason at 36% was lack of training and professional development. And then only 28% are actually saying they're committed to training. Another 28% said they were combining roles and creating hybrid roles. That can be a good idea, and it certainly does create more efficiency. It costs less money, but it does build a lot of pressure on the individual and requires more training. Anyway, the clear belief that there is not enough training and development in the industry, but only 28% of employers are committed to changing this in their own organisation, is a noteworthy thing. Just a quick kind of aside about another challenge when you're talking about hiring entry-level people, and this comes up a lot, clients talk to us about it a lot, is this issue of Generation X hiring and managing Generation Y and the stresses that it causes. So the leaders of businesses today are obviously either baby boomers or Generation X, and it's widely accepted that there is a difference in attitudes between the generations. And I just wanted to share this very simplified, and it's kind of semi-tongue-in-cheek way of looking at how things have changed, but I find it useful. There's a couple of key points on here that I particularly like and strike a chord, I think, for a lot of business leaders. So first of all, if you look at the attitude to work, since my generation, and I was born in 1974, the attitude to work, I think, has changed really from being a difficult challenge, and I can absolutely relate to that. Work was difficult, and I think my memory of it was, yeah, it's meant to be difficult, and work is almost there to be suffered. And now we can see younger employees in our company that feel that work should be a fulfilling experience and a satisfying experience almost immediately. So it puts that question of how do you have a company run by one group and starting to being populated by the other group. The second one to look at was about feedback at the bottom of this slide. I think this is an important one to really think about. My own view at the start of my career 20 years ago was that feedback was something that was best to be avoided at all costs. As long as I wasn't doing anything dishonest or underhand, I could find my own way. And that really contrasts with what we hear today, with people actively looking for feedback, and not just from their bosses. They're looking for feedback from their colleagues and from their subordinates and from their clients, and they want real, open and honest feedback in all directions, and that's a huge change. It's very, very different. So anyway, we're well aware of there being a shift. From your point of view, you just need to understand the nuances here and try to figure out what are you going to do about it when it comes to recruitment and retention. But enough about that. Okay, so final point for today, and I'm almost exactly on track here on time, is about another potential solution, i.e. recruiting from overseas. So this diagram shows the changing attitudes to hiring overseas candidates across different industry sectors. But for now, let's just look at the change across the board, and that's represented by the horizontal kind of yellowy browny line, I think. You can see that in 2012, you've got over 40% of employers saying that they would consider hiring overseas candidates, and that's risen to over 60% in 2015. That's a major change. And I think that that is in contrast sometimes to the government policy changes, which seems to make it more difficult to hire internationally at times. I know they are trying to do things, but it just seems to get more complicated. Okay, that's pretty much it. I'm going to leave you with a few recommendations, kind of key findings, and then we can have a look to see if we have any questions. So I'll just go through these one by one. So key findings. So Canada has a talent mismatch. It's causing wage pressure in multiple industries and in functional areas. Having said that, the very big picture, the macro view in Canada is that there is not wage pressure. The main cause for the mismatch is obviously a lack of awareness of opportunities in some key industries. We think you could resolve both issues if industries, if employers could potentially work better together and cooperate with school level or cooperate with schools and educational institutes. Canada then finally has a significant number of baby boomers. They are going to retire, and employers are or certainly should be concerned, and it should be hiring younger generations to address that issue. On recommendations then locally, obviously you've got to improve awareness of your opportunities in your industry. You've got to partner with schools, and whether it's partnering with other organizations or whether it's an industry association that should be helping you with this, it is something that should be looked at. Address the wage pressure if you do have, if you're operating in a skill shortage area, like a skill shortage industry or a skill shortage, actual job title. A lot of companies are using performance-related bonuses as opposed to increasing base level compensation. That's a good idea. And then training younger generations and a new workforce, it's essential to building a long-term workforce. That is blatantly obvious. Okay, so I'll end then with just recommendations from the Hays Global Skills Index. So a couple of key points. Number one, businesses need to partner with education authorities. I think that's obvious. Governments need to work with businesses with the direct aim of increasing the availability of workers with the required skills. And I think the change that we're seeing that's happening right now, where companies are specifying what they're looking for and it's being matched to candidates who are applying from overseas, is a fantastic idea. Let's see if it works. Government policy must draw a clear distinction between mass immigration, skills migration, very similar point. And the complete recommendations in the index, they're global ones, so some of these might be relevant to you and some may not. So how did we do? Almost 40 minutes, so nearly perfect. Okay, so that's the end of the key messages that we wanted to share with you today. Thank you very much for dialing in and listening. I really hope you found it useful and that you got a couple of ideas or thoughts from it. We have some time to answer some questions that you have. So as I said, if you have a question, just type it into the chat box and we'll do our best to answer it. We may not be able to, we'll do our best. And as I said, we have our own HR Director, Amanda Harvey, Rachel Finan, who leads our HR recruitment business, and Thea Watson, who is responsible for the production of parts of this report, all here for questions. And then as we're waiting for questions, two questions that we always get. The first one is, how do I get the report? So you just go to hays.ca and you'll see there's a button just on the left, close to the bottom, that you can request a copy of the report. And then the second question is usually, where can we get the slides? And we've recorded the webinar and we'll post it on our YouTube channel, so you can go on there and look at all of the slides again, and you can actually turn off the audio so you don't have to listen to me talking. So that's it. So let's see. Hang on, let me open the chat box and then see what kind of questions we have. Okay. We have questions straight away. All right. What is Hays doing with the government to improve the shortage of skilled labour? That's a very good question, actually. Here in Canada, we're not directly connected with the government, I must say. In the UK, where proportionately we're a far larger organisation, we sit on a number of committees directing government policy and sharing this information. I actually think this report, its origins, we're responding to exactly that. We're quite opinionated and we get our message out through webinars and social media, and we do a lot of work in the media. We do a lot of interviews on TV and radio, and we like to get our point across. If we could have a direct influence on the government, if someone can help us with that, then I'd be really interested in making that happen. That would be fantastic. What is how can you improve soft skills in employees who are How can you improve soft skills in employees who are lacking in this area? I would say, I don't know. I think the best thing I've seen on that is just honest feedback. I think too often we see clients reporting that there's an issue with somebody's soft skills, and the first question we always ask when they tell us this, we say, have you told the person this? Have you shared this feedback in the way that you've shared it with us? Sometimes they say yes, and sometimes they say no. But equally, sometimes they say yes, but then when you find out what did they actually say, they've really danced around the issue. You know, it's far more effective saying to somebody, you know, in their first few weeks, you're coming across as being very short with people, or you're coming across as being borderline rude with people. Are you aware of that? And people, generally speaking, my experience, are very surprised to hear that feedback. They're really embarrassed, and they immediately try and fix it. I think straight, honest feedback that isn't personal, you're not attacking the person, you're just saying this is how you come across. I think that's how to deal with it. And you can be more elaborate. You know, we use 360 reviews on people to give them feedback from everybody. We ask for feedback from everybody, we share it. So yeah, feedback and holding a mirror up against somebody is probably the best way for them to realize what it is that they're doing or not doing. Somebody's asking here, has Canada's index changed over the last few years? Well, I think I just said it changed from 5.9 down to 5.6 last year. But Thea, do you know what it was in the year before?
It was in the middle of that 2 years ago, so it's held relatively stable.
So what, it went like from 5.7 to 5.9 and back to 5.6?
Correct.
Right, so it's a kind of a stable market. The only real issue that came through from the survey for Canada, because the workforce seems to be pretty flexible, the education system is flexible, we bring lots of new people into the country, which is great. The only one area really is the talent mismatch, and that's been the one area of challenge, and that affects wage pressure. So we'll see if the new changes in work permits and whatnot actually improves that. So, okay. What are some solutions to upskilling new graduates more quickly and efficiently so it doesn't affect productivity as an employer? Okay, that's a brilliant question. Something that I've seen, and it does work, and we try and do this as well ourselves, is instead of bringing in a graduate and putting down the first 6 months to basically just the cost as you train the person, it can be a great idea to engage with colleges and bring in people on an intern basis. It could be for 6 months. They like working in the organisation, but they learn a lot. They go back to university, and when they finish, they come back to you as a full-time employee. But the great thing is, when they come back, they already have 6 months of training, and they're a useful person and a productive member of society immediately. So I think that's a great idea. And then other things, I think, kind of throwing people into the deep end to some extent, giving them more responsibility, it'll challenge them, and that's basically what Generation Y are looking for, is new challenges. Giving them goals, making sure they understand that they're contributing to the greater goal of the organisation, motivates those people really, really quickly. I think the other thing, maybe from a long-term point of view, is partnering with schools and colleges, probably through an association. Either, if you're a very large employer, you could probably cooperate directly with educational institutions, but for small to medium-sized organisation, that can be hard. So partnering with your association in the right industry and making sure that's on the agenda, so that people are being trained in a way that could be more productive when they come out. Okay, there's another one that says, I'm thinking of the Western Canadian context and downward pressure on oil and gas and general effect upon sources of talent. Hang on a second, was that an extension of a previous question? No. So the Western Canadian context and downward pressure on oil and gas, definitely. Yeah, we did. When we launched our salary guide in January, I can't remember the numbers now, but in Alberta was clearly the most aggressive when it came to salary increases. We had the majority offering over 3% increases and a fair proportion offering over 6%. We reran a very small survey for Alberta about, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago, Thea, was that right?
Yeah, approximately a month ago or so.
About a month ago. Asked the same question. Now, we only had 150 respondents compared to our annual survey is like 5,000 respondents, but at that 150, there was a seismic change in how they were approaching salary increases, and the vast majority had moved back under 3%, and I think it was even a quarter had decided to put a salary freeze in place. So definitely there's a change, but it seems from what we've seen, the change is almost isolated to Alberta. We haven't seen any difference in BC or Ontario yet, and on the small survey we did, it would indicate there was no change there either. So we'll wait and see. Like, will it affect everybody? What else? One more. Okay, we'll do one more question. How is recruitment changing for targeting professional? How is recruitment changing for targeting senior professionals today? Okay, I'm not entirely sure about that, but I think, okay, well, I can tell you what we see. Like, the biggest change we can see in how recruitment is changing is it's the tools that you're recruiting through, and it's about social media, online tools, and the confusion that it's causing. Everything that has come along, like a job board, that should have made things easier, which it did for a while, and then it just caused you to have lots of candidates who weren't qualified. And then social media is fantastic because you can target particular candidates, but the issue is everybody has the same tools, so now we're just back to square one competing against each other. So our advice on this is having a long-term plan on developing your employer brand online, and it means producing good quality content, sharing it with the right people, targeting the right people, building up relationships with them, and then when they decide to move, they come to you. And that really is what it's about, and it's easier said than done, I will admit, but that is what it's about. It's about engaging with as many people as you can so that when they decide to move, they come to you. So anyway, that's it. Unfortunately, I answered most of those questions myself. I didn't ask Rachel to answer any questions there. But anyway, so that's pretty much it. I don't think there are any other questions. We're pretty much bang on time. So that's it. If you have any other questions or if we can help in any way, you can contact me directly, rowan.o'grady@hayes.com. Go on our website. You can request a copy of that report. And there's actually all of the reports are referred to today. You can request online. And hopefully it has been of help. So thank you very much and have a very pleasant day.